It's a normal afternoon at a zoo in China. The elephants are calm, the flamingos are standing around doing nothing, like flamingos do. Then, out of nowhere, the elephants start swaying side to side. The flamingos bunch together in a tight group and stop eating. Snakes that have been buried underground for weeks suddenly come out of their holes in the middle of the day, which never happens. Zookeepers write all of this down because it looks strange enough to note. A few hours later, the ground shakes. A real earthquake hits the area. Nobody told the animals it was coming. There was no siren, no warning app on their phones because animals don't have phones. And yet somehow they knew, or at least they acted like they knew. This isn't one weird story from one weird zoo. This exact pattern, animals acting strange right before the ground starts shaking, has been reported for thousands of years on almost every continent by people who have never met each other and have no reason to make up the same story. So what is actually going on here? Can animals really feel an earthquake before it happens? Or is this just one of those things people believe because it sounds cool? Let's actually dig into this, because the real answer involves sound waves you'll never hear, electric charges floating in the sky, catfish that ancient people trusted more than scientists, and one experiment involving cows wearing tiny GPS collars that might change how earthquake warnings work forever. Let's start with the basics, because you can't understand how animals sense earthquakes until you understand what an earthquake actually is doing under your feet. Deep underground, the Earth's crust is made of giant slabs of rock called tectonic plates. These plates are always moving just extremely slowly, slower than your fingernails grow. Most of the time, the edges of these plates get stuck against each other. Pressure builds up right at that stuck point, for years, sometimes for centuries. Eventually, the pressure becomes too much and the rock breaks free all at once. That sudden release of built-up pressure is an earthquake. But here's the part almost nobody explains properly. An earthquake doesn't just send out one type of shake. It sends out several different kinds of waves, and they don't all travel at the same speed. The first wave to arrive is called a P wave, short for primary wave. P waves are fast. They squeeze and stretch the ground as they move, kind of like pushing and pulling on a slinky. They're also usually pretty weak. Most humans don't even notice them. A few seconds later, sometimes tens of seconds later, the second wave arrives. This one is called an S wave, short for secondary wave. S waves move slower than P waves, but they're the ones that actually shake buildings apart. They move the ground up and down and side to side in a rolling motion. This is the part of the earthquake that you feel, the part that rattles windows and knocks things off shelves. So here's the key detail. There's always a gap between when the P wave arrives and when the S wave arrives. Sometimes that gap is only a couple of seconds. Sometimes, especially if you're farther from where the earthquake started, that gap can be a whole minute or more. Modern earthquake warning systems, the ones some countries use to send phone alerts, work by detecting that first weak P wave and firing off a warning before the stronger S wave shows up. Now here's where animals come in. A lot of scientists believe animals might be picking up on that same early P wave, except way better than we can. Many animals have paws or feet that are far more sensitive to vibration than human feet. Elephants, for example, can pick up vibrations through the ground using sensitive nerve endings in their feet and even in the tip of their trunk. Snakes press their entire body against the earth all day, every day, which means the ground is basically their main sense organ. If a tiny early tremor rolls through the dirt, a snake might feel it the same way you'd feel someone gently knock on a door you're leaning against. That alone could explain some of the strangeness. But it's not the only theory, and honestly, it's not even the most interesting one. Let's talk about sound, because this is where things get wild. Humans can hear sounds roughly between 20 Hz and 20,000 Hz. Below that range is something called infrasound, sound so low in pitch that our ears simply can't pick it up, even though it's still very real and still carrying a huge amount of energy. Elephants use infrasound to talk to each other across miles of savanna. Whales use it to communicate across entire oceans. And here's the thing, some researchers believe that certain earthquakes produce infrasound rumbles in the seconds or even minutes before the main shaking starts, as pressure builds and rock begins to crack deep underground. If that's true, it would mean some animals aren't seeing the future. They're just hearing something we're deaf to. Imagine sitting in a completely silent room while someone next door is playing music so loud it's shaking the walls, except you can't hear a single note of it. That's basically the gap between an elephant's hearing and yours during the lead up to certain quakes. There's another signal worth knowing about too, one that has nothing to do with sound or shaking at all. Underground rock is often packed with tiny amounts of gas, including a radioactive gas called radon. When rock deep underground starts to crack and shift under pressure, tiny pathways can open up that let trapped radon escape upward, sometimes rising into groundwater or even into the air near the surface days before a quake. Some scientists monitor radon levels in wells specifically because sudden spikes have shown up before certain earthquakes in places like Italy and Japan. Groundwater in wells can also change in strange ways before a quake. Sometimes rising, sometimes dropping, sometimes turning cloudy from sediment being shaken loose underground. Farm animals and wildlife that drink straight from ponds, streams, and wells might be picking up on subtle changes in water taste, smell, or temperature days before anything visible happens on the surface. It's a small detail, but it adds one more possible piece to the puzzle of why animals seem to notice something coming before we do. Now let's go back in time, because the most famous story about animals and earthquakes isn't really about pets acting weird, it's about an entire city being saved. In February 1975, in a region of northeastern China near a city called Haicheng, government officials made an unusual decision. Based on a combination of small early tremors, changes in groundwater levels, and a flood of reports about strange animal behavior. Snakes coming out of hibernation in freezing weather, chickens refusing to go into their coops, dogs barking nonstop for no reason, officials ordered a mass evacuation. People were told to leave their homes and stay outside in the cold. Hours later, a massive earthquake hit the region. Buildings collapsed. If people had been inside their homes, the death toll would have been enormous. Because of the evacuation, thousands of lives were saved. Haicheng became one of the only times in history where an earthquake was successfully predicted in advance. And animal behavior was part of the evidence that led to that decision. Here's the twist, though, and it's an important one. Later earthquakes in the same region were not predicted using the same method. And some scientists have argued that Haicheng may have partly been luck, with several different warning signs lining up at once. This matters because it shows something important about this whole topic. Animal behavior might genuinely be picking up on something real, but it's messy, it's inconsistent, and it's incredibly hard to turn into a reliable prediction tool. One lucky success story doesn't prove the method works every time. Let's jump to another famous case, because this one is even bigger. In December 2004, a massive earthquake off the coast of Indonesia triggered one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history. Waves smashed into coastlines across multiple countries, and the death toll was in the hundreds of thousands. In the aftermath, wildlife officials in places like Sri Lanka and India made a strange observation. Areas that were normally full of wild animals, elephants, deer, and other wildlife in national parks near the coast showed almost no animal deaths, even in zones where the tsunami caused massive destruction to human towns. Reports came in describing elephants moving to higher ground before the wave hit, flamingos abandoning their usual nesting areas, and dogs refusing to go outside that morning. Nobody can say with total certainty why this happened. It's possible the animals felt the earthquake vibrations traveling through the ground from far away. It's possible they heard the low rumble of the wave building out at sea, a sound humans on the beach couldn't detect. It's possible some animals simply reacted to smaller signs, like a sudden and unusual drop in the water level right before a tsunami arrives, which is a very real and very visible warning sign that many humans tragically didn't recognize either. Whatever the exact reason, the pattern was noticeable enough that wildlife researchers took it seriously. So now let's get into specific animals, because different creatures seem to be picking up on different clues, and some of these stories go back centuries. In Japan, there's a folk belief that's been around for hundreds of years involving catfish. According to old Japanese legend, a giant catfish called namazu lives underground and causes earthquakes when it thrashes around. That part is obviously a myth. But alongside that myth, regular people noticed something real. Pond catfish and other fish kept in tanks would sometimes become unusually active, thrashing, jumping, and swimming erratically, hours before an earthquake struck the region. This pattern was noticed so consistently that some Japanese researchers in the 1930s, and again in more recent decades, have actually run lab experiments trying to measure whether catfish respond to the same electrical or vibrational changes scientists believe happen before certain quakes. The results have been mixed. Some experiments showed a real pattern, others showed nothing unusual at all, but the folklore was clearly built on people noticing something they couldn't fully explain. Then there are elephants, which come up again and again in earthquake stories across Asia and Africa. Elephants are especially interesting because their feet contain a cushion-like pad packed with sensitive nerve endings, almost like a built-in seismograph. Some researchers believe elephants can detect vibrations traveling through solid ground from many miles away, information they might use normally to sense storms, other elephant herds, or approaching danger. An early tremor rolling silently through the earth might register to an elephant's foot the same way a phone buzzing in your pocket registers to your hand. Dogs show up constantly in these reports too, usually through nonstop barking or sudden anxious behavior right before a quake. Dogs have incredibly sharp hearing, capable of picking up frequencies way higher than humans can hear. And some researchers believe their hearing range might also extend usefully into infrasound territory, though this part is still debated. It's also possible dogs are simply picking up on tiny ground vibrations through their paws, the same way many other animals might. Birds are another common one. Chickens refusing to leave their coop, wild birds going completely silent, or flocks suddenly taking off and flying away have all been reported before quakes in multiple countries. Birds have extremely sensitive inner ears built for detecting changes in air pressure, which they normally use to sense approaching storms from far away. It's possible some birds are detecting subtle air pressure shifts connected to certain kinds of ground movement, though scientists are still trying to nail down exactly how strong this connection really is. And then there's a smaller, stranger group of reports involving insects and even worms. In several regions of China and Italy, people have reported earthworms surfacing from the ground in unusually large numbers right before a quake, crawling up out of the soil even in dry weather when there's no rain to explain it. Some researchers think shifting underground pressure might squeeze pockets of gas or moisture through the soil, pushing worms upward the same way rain normally does. Bees have been reported abandoning their hives altogether hours before a quake, leaving behind honey and larvae, something beekeepers say almost never happens under normal conditions. None of these smaller reports are anywhere near as well studied as the elephant or catfish cases, but they keep showing up in the historical record across completely different countries and centuries, which is exactly the kind of repeated pattern that makes scientists curious enough to actually investigate. Now, here's where the story moves out of folklore and into modern science, because in the last 10 years, researchers have actually started running real experiments to test all of this properly. One of the most interesting projects comes from a scientist named Martin Wikelski, who worked with the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Wikelski had spent years studying something called the Icarus Project, an effort to track wild animal movement using tiny satellite tags. In 2016, his team happened to have cows, dogs, and goats fitted with motion sensors on a farm in central Italy, right in a region known for earthquake activity. When a major earthquake hit the region that year, the team went back through their data and found something remarkable. In the hours before the quake, the animals had shown unusual bursts of movement, far more restless and active than their normal daily patterns, and this restlessness increased the closer they got to the moment the ground actually shook. The pattern showed up across multiple earthquakes in the same region, not just one. Wikelski's team has since argued that with enough animals tagged in enough locations, this kind of behavioral data could potentially become an early warning tool, sort of like a living seismograph network made of actual living animals. This kind of research has picked up serious momentum in recent years. Wikelski's team has continued expanding their animal tagging project across multiple countries, hoping to eventually build a global network where unusual animal movement gets flagged automatically and compared against seismic data in real time. Meanwhile, some regular people have started contributing their own observations. There are smartphone apps now where pet owners can log strange behavior from their dogs or cats, including the exact time and location, so scientists can build a much bigger data set than they'd ever get from a handful of research farms. The idea is simple. If thousands of ordinary house pets around the world start acting weird within the same few hours in the same region, that pattern becomes something researchers can actually analyze instead of dismiss as coincidence. This research is genuinely exciting, but it's also important to be honest about where the science actually stands, because this is a topic where it's really easy to slide from real evidence into wishful thinking. Plenty of scientists remain skeptical about using animal behavior as a serious earthquake prediction method, and their reasons are worth understanding. First, there's a problem researchers call reporting bias. When an earthquake happens, people suddenly remember every strange thing their pet did that morning and connect it to the quake. But normal, restless behavior in dogs or unusual movement in farm animals happens constantly, for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with earthquakes, and nobody writes those moments down because nothing dramatic followed them. This makes it incredibly hard to tell the difference between a real warning sign and a coincidence that only looks meaningful after the fact. Second, there isn't one single confirmed mechanism that explains every case. Some researchers point to ground vibration, others point to infrasound, others point to radon gas or groundwater changes, and others point to a completely different idea involving electrically charged particles. This last theory suggests that stressed rock deep underground can sometimes release positively charged particles into the air in the hours before a quake, subtly changing the electrical makeup of the atmosphere near the ground. A few studies suggest some animals might be sensitive to these tiny electrical shifts, similar to how some fish can sense electrical fields in water. But this idea is still considered controversial, and not every scientist agrees the effect is even real. Third, and this is honestly the most important point, even if animals really are picking up on something, that doesn't automatically mean we can turn it into a reliable warning system. An early warning tool needs to work almost every single time, with very few false alarms, or people will stop trusting it entirely. Right now, animal behavior is nowhere near consistent enough for that. A dog barking at 3 in the morning might mean an earthquake is coming. It might also just mean a raccoon walked past the yard. So where does that leave us? Somewhere in the middle. And honestly, that's a genuinely satisfying place to land, because the real answer is more interesting than a simple yes or no. Animals almost certainly are sensing something real before certain earthquakes. Their bodies are built with tools ours simply don't have: incredibly sensitive feet, ears tuned to sounds we're completely deaf to, and instincts shaped by millions of years of needing to react fast to danger in order to survive. At the same time, turning that sensitivity into a dependable prediction system is a completely different challenge, one that scientists are still working on today through projects like Wikelski's tagged farm animals, ongoing catfish experiments in Japan, and even smartphone apps that let regular pet owners log unusual behavior in real time so researchers can build bigger datasets to study. There's something genuinely humbling in all of this. We build satellites, supercomputers, and networks of underground sensors just to catch an earthquake a few seconds before it arrives. Meanwhile, a herd of goats on an Italian hillside, or a catfish in a Japanese pond, or an elephant standing in a national park might be picking up the exact same signal using nothing but the body they were born with. We spent centuries assuming this was just superstition, old folk stories passed down by people who didn't understand geology. Turns out, some of those old stories were quietly pointing at real science the entire time. The animals weren't guessing. They were listening, feeling, and sensing a world that's constantly speaking in frequencies and vibrations we simply never learned to notice. So next time your dog starts acting weird for no obvious reason, maybe don't ignore it completely. It's probably nothing. But every once in a while across history, in China, in Indonesia, in Italy, it hasn't been nothing at all.